Hello, grade 9 science students. Today what we're learning about is the cycles of matter. Specifically, we're learning about the carbon cycle. We're going to understand how this cycle works in the ecosystem today. In ecosystems, there's two types of categories of substances or chemicals. The first type is organic and the second type is inorganic. Now, organic substances usually contain carbon and hydrogen, also sometimes oxygen and nitrogen, and they can be things like proteins, sugars, fats, etc. And these are the building blocks for organic compounds. And organic compounds are living compounds, so any compound that comes from a living organism. Inorganic substances are considered non-living, and they don't contain as much carbon and hydrogen together. So you'd have things like water, that's non-living. Carbon dioxide, also non-living, contains carbon, but it's not living. And similarly, ammonia, which is NH3, contains hydrogen, but it's non-living. So we need to know that all living things are organic, okay? And they're composed mainly of four elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So what happens to organisms when they die? Well, when organisms die, they decompose, and the living organic molecules get broken down into inorganic molecules by decomposers like bacteria. And you release a lot of CO2 and other inorganic molecules that can be used by plants or producers to grow themselves. So in a sense, organic molecules get broken down to inorganic molecules, and then we serve as a fertilizer to new life and new plants. Carbon is recycled when we take the CO2 from the atmosphere that's released from dead organisms, and what happens is that CO2 can get pulled in through the process of photosynthesis, combined with water through light energy, and you can make new carbohydrates, and that's what a plant does. Producers do that. When a primary consumer eats that plant, it takes that carbohydrates, it breaks it down in its gut, and it turns it into proteins to build that animal's muscle or hair or whatever else it needs. And this is how it's recycled. So that carbon is recycled from the inorganic CO2 that's in the air, gets turned into carbohydrates in the plants, and then eventually turned into proteins by the animal. And this is the cycle of carbon. The primary source of carbon in the air is in the form of carbon dioxide. Now, organisms like you or I, all organisms do cellular respiration. We take oxygen, we combine it with glucose, we make CO2 in the process, along with our energy needs, and we also make a little bit of water. But we release that CO2. Now, plants do the opposite. They take that CO2 in with water and energy and make glucose and oxygen gas. And this is why it is a cycle. They're in a balance together. So if we look, we know that these two processes are dependent on each other. Photosynthesis needs cellular respiration and vice versa. We also can say that there's other things going on here to release CO2. We've got a couple different things happening. We have not only cellular respiration happening, but we also have decaying organisms. And we have other processes where we're releasing carbon dioxide. We're also going to learn that the human impact is that factories and vehicles also release carbon dioxide into the air. So the other carbon sources that we deal with primarily are when things die. When things die, decomposers such as bacteria and fungi break down the organic material as food and recycle the carbon back as carbon dioxide. So when organisms die, they don't decompose. What can happen is that they get caught under rock and dirt and they get formed into oil and coal. In the past century and a half, humans have been increasing the amount of carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels like coal and oil through a process we call combustion. Humans are releasing a massive amount of carbon from old organic reservoirs trapped in the earth by mining and burning fossil fuels. We're also destroying trees at a rapid rate as urban sprawl expands and we spread out how we live and where we live. And this reduces the amount of photosynthesis that can occur. We also know that the carbon dioxide that we're creating gets stored within the oceans. It stays there for a while, but they can only hold so much. And the more carbon dioxide goes into the water, the more the oceans become acidic. And this is a major problem. That's the end of today's video. I'm going to show you a short clip from the World Meteorological Organization, or the WMO, about climate change and the carbon cycle.
Throughout Earth's history, carbon has cycled naturally between the ocean, the biosphere, and the atmosphere. This continual cycle regulates the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. CO2 and other greenhouse gases mix easily into the global atmosphere and act as a kind of blanket to trap some of the radiation reflected from the Earth's surface. This greenhouse effect keeps the planet much warmer than it would otherwise be, allowing for life on Earth to flourish. For the past few 100,000 years, the natural carbon cycle has been in balance, keeping the concentration of atmospheric CO2 more or less constant. But with the Industrial Revolution, humans began to dig up and burn huge amounts of fossil fuels. This long-buried carbon that would have taken millions of years to enter the atmosphere is now being suddenly released in a geological instant. Together with deforestation, this has upset the natural balance of the carbon cycle. Over the past 150 years, the concentration of atmospheric CO2 has risen from 270 to 400 parts per million. The higher this concentration gets, the greater the greenhouse effect becomes. As a result, the planet is warming, and the Earth's surface and the ocean are heating up. This is already causing our climate to change. Unless we rapidly reduce our carbon emissions, we risk seeing more extreme weather events and other dangerous impacts in the years to come.